humans who were like, I was like teen human, sort of exile misfits, just misfits, just sort of exiled like teen humans who were like, I was
Wonderful. Well, welcome to the Comic Spot, you guys. This is a little show I do. It's where the Army veteran, that's me, gets to vet the veterans of comedy. And today we really have one of those veterans of comedy. I'm so proud. Why do people say that? I'm proud of your accomplishment. How entitled am I?
Well, I'm happy to whatever makes you feel good. It didn't take anything away from me, so I'm happy to accept your pride.
Thank you. Well, Michael Adam Kaplan is here, and let me read you his bio because if you know me, you know my memory. He wrote to me, and I quote, "I'm a comedian who's been on Conan, Comedy Central, and his very own 1 hour special on Amazon. He has a podcast called Broccoli and Ice Cream and a new album out called AKA, also known as. He's the nicest person and the funniest comic and the person who wrote this intro. Welcome to this little stage, Michael Adam Kaplan." Hi.
Thank you so much for inviting me and asking what my intro could be. It's nice to be asked. It's sort of like some journalists, will ask a question and then they'll get the answer, but then they will put the information in the article as though they didn't ask the question, as though it were just volunteered out of nowhere. So if somebody asked you the question, like, what do you love most between like the color blue and the color yellow? And they'd be like, I guess if I had to say, I'd say that I love the color blue more than the color yellow. And then the article is just like, this person just really loves the color blue. I don't know. I don't even know. And like, oh yeah, you asked me that. So I just wanted to, I don't often go around, spouting my own accomplishments, except if people ask like, hey, like as a comedian, sometimes like, how do you want me to bring you up to the stage? The host will say. I was like, oh, you could mention this particular accolade or accomplishment if you want to. You don't have to, but if you want, like, they're like, yeah, I want one. And then it would be sort of in bad faith if the host went up and like, they demanded that I say this. So I just wanted to just let everyone know that those things are true. I am very proud of my new album. I'm happy for people to know about it. As well as also, if you don't know who I am, like you're listening, and judge by your own merits, or don't judge not, lest ye be judged. I don't even judge you for judging, because I want to remain logically consistent if I
can. That's about our time, folks.
Oh yeah, happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
That was amazing, Michael. I want to know, like all good comics, there was a point where, you're a great comic. You've been on Conan. Give me a break, man. I got to get into that later. But I want to know, if you grew up in the same kind of home I grew up in, there was a point in your life where comedy was coping or getting attention. And at some early point, you knew you were funny or other people were saying it. Take me back to that.
That's a great question. So I was an only child, so I didn't have like a very full, it was like my mom and dad until they got divorced around when I was 13, 14. And we had also just moved. So I had like grew up with the same kids until I was about 12. And then we moved and I had to start over with like a whole bunch of, kids I didn't know. And that was also starting like puberty and adolescence and the teenage years and high school and, all those different ways of saying the same thing. But so it was sort of, I don't know how it would have been otherwise, but it was that, there's a lot of people that have a lot of challenges. Like I'm very fortunate in so many ways. But I guess the ways in which my earlier life was challenging is that I felt like introverted and shy and alone, and that I didn't have a ton of friends in school because I was starting over with this new geographical scenario. And I did have like a summer camp where like a bunch of some of my best friends are still like from my days of like teenage years at summer camp. But for 10 months out of the year, it was not summer camp. It was and so I feel like my parents having divorced, and which I didn't think of it at the time as like, this is like, woe is me. I was just like, well, this is me. This is life. This is like, these are the challenges. These are like, and I think I was also like, grateful at the time. I'm even more grateful now, knowing all of the different ways that like life can go for so many people, like how much I had, even just by virtue of, being like, so how there's this old joke about fish, like a fish in water is like, somebody's like, hey, how's the water? And the fish is like, what's water? The fish doesn't know anything other than water. Like I didn't know anything other than being, male or cisgender or white or, American, or like my parents were teachers. We weren't the richest, but we had, middle class, like whatever it was. Like I lived in a house, I had a home, like all of these things. Like these were good fortune that I didn't even know how good I had it until like later in life. I was more exposed more to everyone doesn't get to live like this. And so, but I do think at the time when I didn't know, when there was a class I had, my mom made me take a dance class at my synagogue right before all my friends started being bar mitzvah. She's like, you're gonna want to know how to dance at bar mitzvahs. And I didn't feel that way, but I was made to go to these classes, and like I didn't feel the most at home in my body. Like I didn't love it. I don't think the class, I didn't get the most out of it, and I felt like there were other kids there who sort of made fun of me. And I felt at the time, like I used to talk about it, I was like, so that was a traumatic experience I had with dance, until later I would learn like, oh, some people have gone to war and experienced trauma in a way that certainly it's a spectrum, and I don't think it's worth, like some people have emotional or physical trauma in their life as children, as adults. Like perhaps we're all going through in this global pandemic a kind of collective national, international trauma. And also like, just here's the thing, is like I've stubbed my toe metaphorically, and I'm like, ow, it really hurts, and then other people are like, I've broken my leg. I actually don't have all of my limbs. I'm like, oh, that's different. That's a different scope and scale. But at the time when I was limited in my scope, I'm like, ow, my foot, it hurts. Dance, people are mean. And I'm not saying like, if you're in high school, like then your world is your world. But I think that is the time that I started. I don't know if anyone else was telling me I was funny, but I was certainly that was where it was brewing.
Can you tell us how you really feel?
I'm sorry, I only do performances, and I'm a very good actor, so there's no way to know what I actually think and mean.
You're hysterically funny. Hysterically. Where did you get your training? Or did you do this?
Sincerely, there were a lot of people eventually telling me that I wasn't funny. Like you get a bunch of audiences when you start doing comedy. Like, and of course, being funny amongst your group of friends is one thing. For me, I developed confidence at this summer camp. I feel like that is where like there are it was just full of these, outcasts, misfits, just sort of exiled like teen humans who were like, I was very grateful to be able to like have been invited into like a group of like compassionate, artsy weirdos that that like I'm like, oh, that's so like as a kid, maybe, you know, and maybe this is true for adults as well, but in my experience, it was like as a kid, you didn't want to be too different. I didn't want to be too different. But as an adult, it is actually, and in comedy, it serves me very well to be different, because that's as a comedian, as any kind of artist, as a musician, you don't want to just sound like everyone, because what will distinguish you? How do you stand out? As a kid, maybe you want to keep your head down, because sometimes, like whack-a-mole, you know, you'll get whacked on the mole. And but as an adult, it comes in handy. So I think that it's value. One benefit for me is that there was no way for me to fit in with who I was. There was no way for me to be a stereotypical, like, let's say, you know, I didn't like cars, so I couldn't even pretend to like cars. I collected baseball cards until I was like, these don't do anything, you know, like I'm like, comic books, at least these, like, you can read them and get information, like, you know, there's information on a baseball card, and if you love baseball cards and if you love baseball, there's stories of, like, whatever you love, like, it's great to discover what you love. But I definitely, I'm funnier now than I was when I started doing comedy, and probably funnier then than when I was a teenager. But I think it's partially that my family loved me so much. That was like, even at the time when, like, my school life was like, oh no, and I didn't care that my family loved me so much, but I'd been given this positive messaging from birth, like, you could be anything, you could do anything, you're the greatest. And you know, in my family I was the greatest, but they're talking to me like, of all the families, like, get out there, like, you could be the president, and please, like, you could be anything. And I was like, I guess I want to be a comedian. And then audiences are like, I don't know why you think you could do comedy. And I'm like, because I was believed in so strongly. And it was, you know, this self-delusion that, like, because nobody's good at comedy when you start. It's very rare to be good when you start. But if you have, and so you need some level of delusion, or there are some people who actually have lived a life and have experiences that are, you know, valuable and worth sharing. But and then they start doing comedy, or they start being an artist or a musician, and they're like, oh wow, you have something to say. I didn't have anything to say, so I was just like, oh, but I like talking. I didn't have anything to say, but I liked talking. And so I got good at talking because I didn't have any kind of shame. I didn't know. It was unconscious incompetence. I didn't know how bad I was, or I knew that you were supposed to be bad. I'm like, oh yeah, you start out, you're not good. And audiences are like, why are you doing it? And I'm like, to get better, I think, and hope. And I hope. And then that is how I got better at comedy, was by thinking I was that I was worth something. And I was worth something, but I wasn't worth what I thought. I had an inaccurate self-assessment that eventually grew, because the two things I think one needs to do comedy is a balance of delusional self-confidence and painful self-awareness. And then those two things can interact and grow together until eventually, like, oh wow, that wasn't good. Okay, now I have more awareness. And then you eventually, you know, hopefully, I don't know, I'm not done yet, so I don't know, maybe this will all be incorrect later. But.
Oh my gosh, this is the funniest TED Talk ever.
Well, that's the thing. If you're doing a TED Talk, then the bar for comedy is a little lower. Like, when I actually started as a musician, I would perform at like these open mic nights at a place called Club Passim, of just a folk music venue, a beloved folk music venue that's been around for decades in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I think Bob Dylan and Joan Baez performed there 50 years ago. And they had an open mic every Tuesday night, and I would go and I'd play some music and I'd do some jokes, sometimes one, sometimes the other. But everyone who just played music, they were only a musician, like they'd be holding a guitar and they would say a little something before they started, and everyone would laugh way more at just a quick offhanded story from a musician before they start playing than a comedian, if they're like, this isn't even the thing that I'm trying to do. So certainly, like, yeah, funniest TED Talk it could be as funny as the funniest comedian, but the point is, this is not a stand-up show, so the bar is lower for what even doesn't even have to be. This doesn't have to be funny at all. This could be truthful and sincere and not. And I mean, you could just yell it. I mean, yelling is funny. I mean, if I was just saying these things. So yeah, thank you for saying the nice things that you're saying. I appreciate it.
Oh my goodness sakes. So what was the day that you got up on stage and how did that feel the very first time?
Great question.
Thank
So
you.
I was a musician and still am a musician, but my parents were music teachers and I played violin since I was 4 and I didn't like it. And then in high school, I taught myself guitar and I loved it because I wasn't being made to do it. And I started writing songs and some of the songs were funny. And that was the initial object of my confidence was my songs that like I played them for my friends and in college at the coffee shop and at talent shows and like some of the songs were funny like some of them had like punchlines in them and so when I was like so I called around looking to find wherever I could perform my music and one bars and when I turned 21 I was still in a senior year in college and I looked up online it was pre-Google I think just like Yahoo or Hotbot I was just like ask Jeeves, please tell me where are clubs for performing. And I found a bunch of venues that were just like, how many people can you bring? And I'm like, me, but this one comedy club where I eventually like would perform maybe more than I performed anywhere else ever. Where I started out called the Comedy Studio. It's still there. But yeah, in like late 1999, I don't say that I started doing comedy until like 2002 because I was pursuing music, but I pursued music in this comedy club because I was like, I have these funny songs. Can I play them? And the owner, Rick Jenkins, was like, sure, if you want, you could have 5 minutes here. I was like, well, that's not a long time. I guess I'll play 2 very quick songs. So I came with my guitar. So it's the first time on stage for me, like it's a hierarchy or like a level, different layers because I was playing violin since I was a child. I performed at recitals. I performed in front of in large auditoriums. I performed at Carnegie Hall with a large group of other like 10-year-olds when I was somewhere in my childhood. Like it was just part of the program that I was in. This gigantic orchestra of hundreds of kids, I think, certainly dozens. And so they're like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, 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 or just like have your mom sign you up for the right program. And so I've been performing, I've been on stage. And I remember like as a kid, one of my first recitals, like I felt nervous and I felt like my legs were shaking and I was just playing a solo. And I remember afterwards talking to my mom and being like, my legs were shaking. And she was like, it didn't look like that at all. So I was like, oh, well, that's good. Nobody else knew that I was nervous. And so over the course of the years of performing as a child in music, I think, and then once I started like playing guitar and it was all songs for my friends. And so there was like no stress, no pressure. And I would just, I was like, oh, this is fun, right? And it was like a positive, especially when things were funny, like, oh, people like it. That's the thing about comedy compared to music is that you get, for the most part, if you're successful, it because people are laughing. Whereas if you're successful with music, people are, maybe they're emotionally moved, maybe they're clapping, but people will clap politely, even if they don't like your music. But people very rarely will just laugh politely if they don't like your comedy. Some audiences will, but music audiences are kinder than comedy audiences. Comedy audiences are more truthful than music audiences in a way. And I do think that kindness is the ultimate truth. So there's some overlap here, but I was performing, throughout my childhood and then into college. And then for the first time at a comedy club where I brought my guitar and I was like, here to play these songs. I went on right after Jonathan Katz, who was, had a TV show at the time, Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist. He was the most famous comedian at that time in the room, certainly. And he closed his set with a musical number. And I'm like, now I went up and I think I said to the guy, I'm like, I'm here for my first time to perform right after the most famous comedian in the room does the same thing that I'm doing, but better. And I feel like people laughed at that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Cause that was just like legit the emotional truth of my experience. And I don't think that I think I did. I was like, well, my songs are, like I think I understood that I wasn't competing with him. Some people are like, oh, you don't want to follow somebody who does great. You want to follow somebody who does awful and you look great by comparison, but you want the audience to be having a good time. So you want unless they love it so much that they leave, they're like, that's enough, I'm gone. Like it was great. He had a great set. People enjoyed it, and they're like, and now the next comedian, you're not introduced as like, this guy's an idiot, you know, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, he shouldn't even be here, like what is he even thinking? And so that you're presented as a comedian, and I came on stage and I was like, I must be like, unless somebody's made a horrible mistake, I'm supposed to be here for 5 minutes. So I think I felt like that sort of yin yang of, you know, of self-confidence. And like, I know that this song like should end in a minute and you'll enjoy it. Maybe you'll like it not as much as that's, but it's not, you're like, I'm not him. It'd be like, oh, look at this baby. Oh, that baby's not walking yet. What an idiot. Why isn't that baby? Look at these adults walking. Like, you're not comparing, like nobody was comparing me, a baby comedian, to this massively successful comedian. Or if they were, like, I think that would be a foolish thing to do. So I don't think that I was able to, like, you know, I don't think I could have vocalized this all. I don't think I could have, you know, assessed analytically all that I'm doing now. Then I was busy doing it and being it. But I do think that was all what was swirling around within.
Oh, Toledo, holy Toledo. Oh my. You're just amazingly funny.
Mm.
So what's the biggest lesson you've learned along the way that other people should pay you $1,000?
Yeah, well, my Venmo's open, and
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to say the biggest lesson, but I guess I'll say, I mean, there's a thing that I learned like from Buddhism. It's like, there's this Zen koan, like, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And like the point in comedy is like, how do you do it? Like, if you don't do comedy and you want to do comedy, like, how do you do it? Like, right now you kind of don't. If you can't go, but in the before times and in the later times, or if you're somewhere where like there's a vaccine, or there's herd immunity, or, you know, whatever the thing is, like,
Lots of bleach.
yeah, just you've got a lot of bleach to drink. You don't do that. Don't drink your bleach. And so the way to become a comedian, the way that I became a comedian, is you eventually go to open mics. You go to places where you're allowed to perform. You write comedy and you perform comedy, and then you just keep doing that. And that's literally the only, like, there's no secret. Like, I remember there's a guy, I was doing some shows with my friend Zach Sherwin, a wonderful comedian, rapper, artist, crossword show purveyor. Check out Zach Sherwin and his crossword show the next time that is possible. Zach and I, great friends, best friends. We toured together for a few weeks. He lives in LA. I live in New York. And so like 2013, 14, each summer, we went out for like 2 or 3 weeks and just like drove around the Southeast and did a bunch of shows. And I remember in Savannah, Georgia, after the show, there wasn't a ton of audience at the show, but there were a number of comedians at the show, like local comedians who came out to see us. And very grateful for that. And afterwards, like, a bunch of them sort of gathered around, and we had this sort of impromptu kind of just like, you know, question and answer session. Like, we're like, oh, we don't know everything. Like, nobody knows everything, but like, we were comedians, we were professional official comedians in their town, and they're like, what's that like? And like, asking all these questions. And there was this one guy who kept asking, like, he was like 19, this like tall, thin dude. Who he like, it was at a time when, you know, it's like I was in my 30s and he was 19, but he was so much taller than me. I'm like, it seems like you're supposed to be older than me. You know, like, this is like, at a certain point, it used to be everyone taller than you was older, but that stopped. But he had only been doing comedy 6 months, he said. And we're like, oh, like, the advice is just do it. Just get on stage as much as you can. Maybe go to another town. How much can you get on stage here? Go somewhere you can get on stage and just write, perform, listen back, edit, see what works. And he was like, okay, but like, what's the shortcut? You know, how do you? I was like, we're not trying to trick you. And like, kind of, people eventually, over the course of like maybe 20 minutes after everyone had gotten the answers to their questions, they start like like, you know, you see a movie where like there's time lapse video and like over the court, like, you know, mountains are eroding and like it's night and it's day and like everything is changing and people are coming and going like to their job and leaving and like the place is shutting down and opening up again. And it was only like 20 minutes, but it's like everyone else eventually fades away and it's us and this guy continuing to ask. He's like, okay, but this guy like maybe had this viral video and we're like, oh yeah, if you, that's certainly, you can't plan for that necessarily, or we don't know how to do that. Like that's maybe a bonus thing. Like, yeah, like Bo Burnham, amazing, wonderful comedy artist and more, movie maker now. In the beginning, even himself, he's like, I got lucky that my videos got seen millions of times. Like there's, when you haven't had any videos seen any times, like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to plan. Maybe there's people out there who have that, but comedians, stand-up comedians don't, that's not the knowledge that we have. By doing stand-up comedy, by chopping wood and carrying water, and then eventually 5 years in, 10 years in, 15, 20 years in, you're like, oh, now I've, you know, I'm not saying that I've achieved a state of comedy enlightenment, but I am saying that I am more enlightened about how to do comedy now that I have done comedy than when I didn't do comedy. And so like when you don't know something, you don't even know what you don't know. Like in 5 years, guy, if you're still doing comedy, like this is 5 years later, if he's still doing it, I wish I'd gotten his name. But if you're a tall, thin Savannah comic, I hope that you're still doing it and that you're like, oh yeah, those guys did give us the good advice of the only advice there is, which is do comedy, like write and perform and edit and like, you know, and read and listen and live a life that's worth commenting and have experiences that, you know, like what is unique about you? What is not unique about you? What do you have in common with everyone? What do you have in common with no one? Like, and nobody can tell you how to do comedy. But if you're asking how to do comedy, I can only tell you to do comedy. That I'm telling you what to do, comedy. Like if you want to do comedy, do comedy. And eventually, and he was like, okay, but so this guy does this thing. And we're like, yeah, if you want to do that thing, you can do that thing. It's like, so maybe like acting, is that the thing? Or improv? You're like, yeah, if you want to do those things, but definitely like doing comedy is the only thing. The only advice is to write and perform comedy. It's not, there's no secret, like you're in a video game, just like walking against a wall and like asking the wall different questions. You're like, it's just a sign on the wall that says do just do it. And then finally, after 20 minutes, he was like, okay, so you think I should get some kind of gimmick? And we were like, yeah, absolutely, do that. That is the answer. You figured it out. Okay. So, and also here's one other answer to the question. And I know you very graciously asked me before we started how much time I would be interested in talking for. And I will tell you that, I mean, I'm having such a delightful time. I said a half hour, I'm fine to go. Not indefinitely, but if, you know, we don't, no need to cut it short at a specific time. It's
cool. This is so great.
So the other thing, there's this attitude that I don't know if this is a joke. So this is, I think if I did it on stage as a joke, it wouldn't be my funniest joke. But if I do it in this TED-like talk, I feel like this might be a funny point. But so I don't want to, you know, I don't want to blow it out of proportion. But sincerely, I feel like I have conversations with younger comedians sometimes, or like maybe I was the younger comedian having this conversation at one point, and an older person, a wiser person, a more experienced comedian gave me this advice. I certainly gleaned it over the years. Like, it seems like when you start out doing comedy, like that there's so many things that you also should be doing that you like, okay, so you gotta write and perform, right? You gotta write and perform. Those are the things. You gotta listen back. You gotta have like maybe a recording device, maybe a camera, maybe a video camera if you can afford that. Like you can watch yourself, you can listen to yourself, right? You listen back. Maybe you gotta be friends with people. Maybe you have a writing group. Maybe you wanna write monologue jokes. Maybe you wanna, write for Saturday Night Live, or maybe you wanna write for a late night show. Maybe you wanna, you gotta, so you write those jokes, practice, even if those aren't the jokes you normally would write, try to get out of your comfort zone. Maybe take an improv class. Maybe you gotta take an improv class. Maybe you got to take an acting class. Maybe then you can be in commercials that'll help make you some money. Maybe you got a college booking agent. Maybe you got to get a not college booking agent. Get any kind of a commercial booking agent. Get all the booking agents that you can, because you want to get all the bookings that you can. But before you got to do all the bookings yourself, you got to be reaching out to people. You got to be asking them to get on shows. You got to be, have a website. You got to have, social media. You got to have, maybe make Vines. You got to make, YouTube videos. You want to have a web series, you gotta tweet, you gotta put things on Facebook, you gotta promote your shows, you gotta have your shows, you gotta set Instagram, you gotta start taking pictures, you gotta get on Snapchat, you gotta do TikTok now, you gotta do all these things, you gotta get a manager, help you shape your career, you gotta do all these things. And like, you know what? You don't even gotta do comedy. Like that's 100%. It's all you get to if you want to, but you don't got to. Like I honestly, I was just having this conversation with a friend about my friend Zach, same Zach from earlier, about how we used to go on auditions for commercials with some frequency. It was just part of. And here's the way that I think about it now. I'm like, oh, like when you're starting out, you're like, you want to be in show business. You want to make your living with show business. And I would rather, like at the time I was working at a cafe, I was like, if I can get booked in a commercial and make as much money as like a month at the cafe is work, maybe I don't have to work at the cafe. I'd rather be in a commercial than work at the cafe. But I also don't, that's not my dream to be in a commercial. Like maybe if it's a funny commercial that a friend of mine wrote, like I've been in a couple of like a friend of mine, 2 times a friend has asked me to be in a movie without auditioning. I'm like, great. I don't love auditioning. I love being in a thing that my friend wants me to be in. Great. And it's a funny movie. I'm happy to be in this funny movie, but it's not my dream, my goal. I love doing comedy. And so my friend and I were just like, oh, wow. Like it used to be that I thought like, well, I want to be in show business and commercials, acting in a commercial, that's show business. So I guess I want to act in a commercial. And so I think that to answer your question, a thing that I've learned that is big is know what you want to do and always check in with yourself about whether that is, why do you want to do what you want to do? And what is actually the thing that you want to do? Like I did want to get a college booking agent, partially because I wanted to get, I wanted to perform and make my living doing comedy. And I'm like, I think I'd be good for college because I was in my mid-20s, my late 20s. I'm like, I was still in grad school. And so I was like, I think also I want to get on TV, but really I only wanted to get on TV so that it would make me more attractive to a college booking agent. I think I found a college booking agent before I even got on TV. And then I got like, this is great. Nice. I mean, I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've had being on TV. And it also does help, maybe thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, depending what the show is. Like every opportunity that I get to do comedy on TV or otherwise, there's a book called Finite and Infinite Games, and I haven't read it, but the idea that I understand it to be about is that some games have an end. Like you play baseball, there's rules that the game ends and a team wins. For playing catch, there's no end. I mean, you stop whenever you want to stop, but the purpose of catch, the function of catch is like it's an infinite game. It's just fun. You get to like playing the game is the fun thing. Throwing a frisbee around, like it's maybe ultimate frisbee is a finite game. Just tossing a frisbee is an infinite game. In a relationship, like people are like, getting married, that's the goal. Having a kid, but the relationship ultimately, it doesn't end when you get married. It's an infinite game, hopefully, that similarly, you get to check in with yourself and your wants and your desires as you continue to grow as a human yourself, as a comedian, if you're a comedian, as a member of society, as whatever I'm growing as a human, a man, a straight person, a cisgender person, like growing like to be like a more experienced, learned person on all issues that I didn't know about as much before. And in a relationship, I've been in a relationship now it's about 4 years next week, and it's my longest relationship, it's my most relationship, my most valuable relationship. And I'm continuing to want to be in it and to grow in it. Like I didn't always even want to be in a monogamous relationship, but I am, and I'm happy with it, and I want it to keep continuing and growing. And so the point is, like, I mean, I might not, this is another joke to answer the question, that in the beginning of my comedy career, I was just like, I just want to be funny. I want to say things. That's all I want to do. I want to say things that are funny and have people like them. And then eventually, like the album that I just put out this year that I recorded, 17 years into doing comedy, I recorded it a year ago, and I've been doing comedy about 18 years now. And this album is now, like, I've always written jokes that I cared about. And now this is the first album that I think is full of only and all jokes that I care about things that I care about. Whereas like in the beginning, it might have been like, a joke about a silly thing that doesn't, not that it doesn't matter, but there's a spectrum of mattering. I'm like, oh, I mean, joy itself, creating jokes are valuable, whatever they're about, And then also for this album, I'm like, I think I can make this be all about, like, as funny as I can be about stuff that I care about. And so a joke that might be in the next hour could be something like, when I started, I was just doing comedy and not necessarily like helping. Like now, like the comedy, this hour of comedy, this album called AKA, it's about compassion. It's about love and not murdering. That's what a lot of the jokes are about. And some of it's about veganism. Some of it's about psychedelics. Some of it's about open relationships. Some of it's about, gender equality. Some of it's about racism. Like there's all these like things in it that I'm not reinventing any wheels, but I'm like sharing my own discovery process and presenting hopefully from, my original perspective, like my interaction with all of these ideas that sort of root in kindness. And so my first album, funny, maybe some stuff that was like about social justice issues I cared about, and other stuff that was about movies that I didn't care about. But I'm like, funny joke about a movie I didn't care about. So originally, not specifically trying, like not helping, like not hurting. My goal was not. I mean, who knows? Like we all contain multitudes. That's the multitude that the multitude that I contain, involving my memory of Walt Whitman quotes, is that multitude. But in the beginning, not explicitly endeavoring to help. And also now I'm still trying to be funny, but I'm like, maybe this comedy, like some people have listened to my jokes about veganism and have gone vegan or have understood veganism more. And I'm like, I think that's valuable. I'm glad the jokes are funny. And also, if on top of the jokes being funny, if it helps, then great. Like maybe maybe I'm going to continue to say things that help. Maybe my next hour won't even exist because I'll just be, I got to get out there and help. I got to help more. And so it's possible. Like my goal used to be a singer-songwriter. That was my sincerest dream since like childhood, since teenage years. And I wanted that so much. And then that goal morphed into being a comedian. And if I had just stuck, if I was like, but I said when I was 15 that I wanted to be a musician. So you're going to do what your 15-year-old self said, or else, you stick to it. You start something, you finish it until you're a famous musician. I don't want to see you start a comedy career. No, thank you. So with respect to that, I would say, always know who you are and know what you want, and what you want with respect to your personal, your professional, your creative, your relationship, your activist, your communal, like your part in the world and your own individual life, in your family, whatever those things are, like just know that they're never set in stone, and that it's good to check in with them once in a while, because maybe you can keep growing and learning. And so I think that my comedy has improved. Like I wasn't explicitly thinking about this, but just know, like it's so funny. I just listened to Mark Maron on with Jerry Seinfeld on his podcast. Jerry Seinfeld went on Mark Maron's podcast, and Mark is asking Jerry about like doesn't comedy, like, are you using it like to cope? Are you using it as like an emotional, like a tool? And Seinfeld's like, no, I just like doing comedy. Just like, I just love the laughs. I just like getting jokes. And Mark's like, really seemed like Mark really wanted to be like, but like, aren't we? And Simon's like, and I love that you do what you do. Like, I'm glad for you to do what you do and for me to do what I do. And I'm like, but isn't there somewhere something that we have? Isn't this? And they do have something in common. And they're both being uniquely themselves and doing comedy. And if Mark's comedy is like funny and personally like evocative of the emotional experience he's having at a given time, then wonderful. And if Seinfeld's is like, these are the funniest jokes that I thought of about chairs, like, then there's place for that in the world. And so I feel like I started probably closer to, like, well, I'm just gonna, I don't even know if I am funny, so I got to try to be funny. And so just look at your whoever your heroes are, whoever's doing what you think you could do your version of, like, look at where they are. Like, if you're like, I love like Reggie Watts, I don't know, I love Maria Bamford, I don't do what they do. But if I look at them, like, how did they start becoming them? How did they start? So how can you start becoming you? Is, like, what have you enjoyed doing? What have you been good at? What do you want to enjoy doing? What do you want to be good at? And then it's never set in stone. So just always, and even if it was set in stone, this is a fun thing. This is an idea that I don't think I've ever said. But like, so your identity needn't be set in stone. And even if it was set in stone, stone erodes over time with water. So, and also you're made of water. So there's a lot going on. So I hope that answers all of that question.
It does. How do you feel? I'm getting towards the end of my questioning, but you
Sure.
can feel free to end this with anything you want to say to human beings out there during this difficult time. But how do you feel your very first pandemic is making you a better human?
Great question. I think that, so here's something that happened at the beginning of the pandemic is my grandmother was 91 and she died in mid-March, just about 3 months ago now. And it was and is sad. Like, I love her very much. I still talk about her in the present tense, and I'm glad for the relationship that I had with her. And no specific regret. Like, I sometimes called her more than she wanted me to. I would call her. She's like, I'm happy to hear your voice. I'm playing mahjong. I gotta go. And I'm happy to have had the relationship with her that I didn't have to have all the memories. And during this time, like, it was right at the beginning of the stay at home, and a lot of people were able to reach out and did reach out. And I'm now talking to my mother more than I would, for both reasons. So it's hard to know which, like, if it had only been my grandmother had passed away and there was no pandemic, I'm sure I would still be talking to my mom more than I was. Like, it was like we used to talk on a weekly basis, and maybe text occasionally. And I would see her once a month, let's say, something like that. But now I haven't seen her except for the memorial for my grandmother. But in the past several months, we've been texting every day. She's on Facebook now because my grandmother was on Facebook, and she got on Facebook to see all the things that people were, kindly saying about my grandmother. And now she's there. She's sort of fulfilling the role. She's filling the space that my grandmother occupied in my life, and more so because now I'm talking to my mom on the phone more days than I'm not, which is like, it's never been that in my life. And I'm glad to be there with my mom and for my mom, both for, the global pandemic reasons, to be with her because she lives alone. And I live with my girlfriend, and I feel very fortunate to have this person I love with here. And my mom has gone on some like socially distanced dates, like walks in parks, but she doesn't have a partner that she lives with. And so I'm glad that she has me. I'm glad that I have her. And so I talk to her. And so I think that in ways, and it's not that here's the thing is, like I said, I don't know if it is the pandemic or if it is the loss of my grandmother. That is, like, neither one alone is fully responsible for helping me be there more with my mom and for my mom. But and it doesn't matter, So I feel like even the question of, like, sometimes people ask this question about comedy, like, how is it different now than when you started? And it's hard to answer because, like, the landscape is different, but also the inner landscape is different. Like, oh boy, when I started, nobody liked me because my jokes weren't good. Now more people like me because my jokes are better. So I can't speak to, like, because I can't speak to what's the difference between starting out now and starting out before, because I only did one of those things. Like, I'm on a train that's moving forward in time, and I'm also walking forward on the train. And so, like, looking out the window is different no matter where you are on the train. But definitely, like, I'm walking up towards, like, I was like, my ticket, I have a better ticket now. I have a better seat. Like, my seat reclines more. That's what the train is nicer now. But it was just that part was nicer the whole time. And so I think that everything in life, my goal is to hopefully continue to get better as a human, you know, as a boyfriend, as a son, as a friend, as a stranger, as, you know, a member of society. And I mean, I guess so. What another thing that, like the way that my grandmother's death coincided with the beginning of the pandemic time, is of course the racism pandemic, the social justice, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, being as present in on the forefront, like whatever the opposite of the back burner is, like it's on the front burner now more than it ever has been, in my experience and in the experience of a lot of people. Like, I mean, it certainly, I know there are Black people, people of color, indigenous people who have known since before 2016 that there was systemic racism. And like, I don't know when I learned the word systemic, the phrase systemic racism, but I know it was more recent than a lot of people. Like, I'm reading more books now, that specifically speak to this experience. So I think that this is a way that I am, you know, when I guess even to say the word bettering myself, like, I mean, everything, like, we're always gaining years, we're gaining time. And so we're gaining life experience. And hopefully that correlates with, you know, like, there are some people who are old and wise, and then there's some people who are old and set in their ways, you know? And that's another fun thing that I'll, old and wise versus old and set in their ways. I'm just recording that for future rememory. But it, like, you have the capacity, the more you are alive, like the longer you live, you can live long. Like, some people live, I've heard this said, I forget by whom, but there's living long and there's also living wide and living deep. Like that, you know, you could be asleep. You could be metaphorically or physically asleep, for more time than you're not, or than you were, or than other people are. And so I'm glad to take some of the time that I have, like at the beginning of the pandemic, I was using a lot of my time to help promote the album that was coming out on May 8th. And I was going on dozens of podcasts and like shows like this, and I was very grateful to get the opportunity to do that. And in a way, I was not grateful that the coronavirus was doing what it was doing. I was, you know, if I could not have the extra time to do extra podcasts, I would gladly trade those in for fewer people afflicted with the virus, or with anything. But given that now I have this time, I was glad to be able to promote this album that had this message that I cared about, that had this comedy that I was the most proud of, to get that out there. And now that the album is out and that I've done most of the, you know, the publicity, the promotional blitz that I have, I'm like, I have comparatively more time. And so I'm now using some of that time to do, you know, like text banking, to text people, to communicate with their Congress people, the representatives, to be like, hey, can you take $1 billion away from the NYPD and use it to reinvest in, you know, mental health and education and anti-poverty, you know, like different kinds, you know, it reinvested in communities of color instead of tanks, you know, instead of, you know, over militarization. And so I've been, you know, learning more and amplifying more voices of people who know more than I do about this. And I've been reading, I just finished Ta-Nehisi Coates's book, We Were 8 Years in Power, An American Tragedy, which is full of 8 essays that he had written over the course of Obama's years in office. And one of them was called The Case for Reparations, which is the only one that I had read prior to reading the rest of them. But it's just, there's so much information, there's so much knowledge, there's so much wisdom, there's so much art, there's so many valuable pieces of work, of literature, of music, of film that you know, I was not looking for, you know, years ago, and I am looking for more now. Like the book that I read before this Coates book was a book by called just so you want to talk about racism, I believe is the name of the book. And it's just so accessible and just full of valuable like statistics, like for people who are like, I don't know about affirmative action. It's like, here's a chapter on affirmative action and what it did accomplish, and thus what it, you know, what of value. If there are people that say, I don't know, it's just always been the way that it is, you know, like it hasn't ever always been just one way. Other than America has been always like founded with slavery as part of our Constitution, and as part of the way that America could become as powerful as it is, to be as wealthy as it is. And so I'm like, there's a Doug Stanhope joke that I love where he says something like, I'll yell at you tomorrow for not knowing, I'll yell at you today for not knowing something that I just learned yesterday. I think that's what it is.
Wow.
And so I'm here, like, if I'm yelling at anyone, I'm yelling at my past self, you know, I'm not yelling at anyone. I mean, I'm yelling, but it's not at anyone. I'm like, this is like, how did anyone not know anything before they knew it? Is they didn't look for it, they didn't see it, they weren't taught it, it wasn't shared with them, it wasn't part of their lived experience. Like, I don't know what it's like to be you in so many ways, like, and you don't know what it's like to be me, and there are things that we may have in common and there are things that we don't, and so we might share one aspect and not another. Like, you know, my girlfriend is a white woman, and we've had conversations about how I can't like, there's things I don't know about the experience of being a woman, and there's things that we both don't know about what it's like to literally be a person of color, and so it's, you know, and coming from being a white person and a man person and a straight cisgender person, like, I have been, you know, the default settings have been for my benefit for this whole time. And I've been like, there's one thing I learned this a long time ago. I forget, I should find out where this came from, but I read an article about two transgender academics, two transgender college professors, I believe. One was assigned male at birth, one was assigned female at birth. And then they got their jobs in academia. And then while in academia, they transitioned. And so the assigned male at birth person was a woman, lived as a woman from that point on, and vice versa for the assigned, whichever the other one I didn't say went the other direction. And they both reported that while presenting as a woman, they received more sexism. They received more people, like, regardless of whether they were transgender or cisgender, men would talk over them. They would not be, valued as much in like objectively measurable ways in their experience. And it was likened in this article to, or this piece, this essay, to like that, the idea that there's this current, this invisible current that's carrying us all along, or that we're swimming against. And that if it's the current of gender, then it's carrying men forward in ways that you don't know when it's going the other direction unless you have experienced it going the other direction. And so a man might swim, or a white person might swim with the current, not knowing that they're with the current because they don't feel the current. They're just like, this is just my life. I'm just a fish in the water. I don't even know. What do you do? What current? And they get farther because they are doing something. They're swimming and they're moving, but the current is helping. And then when you swim that same power against the current, you get half as far or not quite as far. And then that could also, like, it can compound that if you're swimming against the current and you see yourself not getting as far as some people, but you're like, I think I'm working as hard as them, if not harder, but they're accomplishing more than me, they're achieving more than me. Like, how it might demoralize you. You might try less. It might not, like, what if I try, it doesn't help. And if I don't, like, it's like the same if I don't. Whereas for a man, for a white person, when we're traveling with the current, like, we're like, wow, look how far I got. That was me at the beginning of comedy. The delusional self-confidence that was based in, being carried. I'm like, look, hey, I'm doing it. I think I'm doing it. I don't like, and then there was kind of a fake it till you make it, like, oh, look, and I actually my arms did get stronger, my comedy arms, my comedy legs. And then even if there was no current, then I would be stronger. And so I now know that in a way. I mean, it's not, again, the knowing is not set in stone, and I don't know everything, but now I know that more than I did before, when maybe this will be the last piece of it. In 2008 to 2010, I dated a woman who was a comedian, and I'd been doing comedy by that point like 6 to 8 years, and she'd started after I did. So I had just been on TV for the first time. She was, she was very funny, and she was, earlier in her career, and she now has credits that I don't have. But at the time, I had accomplished some objective things in comedy, and she had not accomplished those specific things. And so we're at a party, and I remember her coming up to me and being like, that person was kind of like either rude to me or dismissive of me. And I was like, but they were nice to me. And she's like, yeah, they were nice to you. And it was, I think, difficult to know whether it was because she's like, they think that you can, that you are somebody who is more important because you have achieved this thing. So they don't have to be nice to me because I can't help them. They can't network with me. Or it could just be that you are a man and they are a man, and they're treating you like a man, and they're treating me not like a man. And at the time, I remember being like, what? Like, I don't know how explicitly we had this conversation, but I remember resisting. I remember being like, I was in the resistance of the wrong direction. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I was like, legitimately, I can't even say it without it sounding like a caricature. I'm like, my experience is different. So, and mine is right for me. And so yours, which is different than mine, isn't right according to me. And what a child. I don't want to say that I was stupid or an idiot, but I'm like, what a child who had never experienced like that logical presentation of what it was and how it was. And like and the information exists. It's not like, and people are trying to hide it. The people in power, the wealthy, the white supremacy structures, the patriarchy, they're like, I mean, power likes continuing to be powerful. Like I'm part of it. I benefit from it. I'm like, I mean, I'd like for more of my taxes or more of my donations to help people. And I do. So I have been doing my best to learn all that I can, and to partially learn that it's funny because my job is to talk, and my career is to talk, but in this time, my job is to listen more. So I guess that's a thing that I've been listening more to my girlfriend. I've been listening more to, wise people who are out there fighting the good fight, walking the walk, talking the talk, expressing the good expression, and doing my best to also to help in ways that I can, which I don't know if that is, it's hard to detangle the coronavirus pandemic from the systemic racism pandemic, which has been ongoing. But it is, so that is something that I have been and continue to be working on learning.
Wow, what a dissertation that was. My goodness. I played the violin too.
Oh, great.
And I just feel that what I love about you is you're totally connected to the material you're talking about, and you're passionate about it. And if in order for me to want to go see a comedian or to support a comic, I have to feel their passion. I don't care about the words. If I don't feel the passion coming out of it, I could feel coming out of you that you just love to do comedy and you really feel what you're saying. And I couldn't be a bigger fan now. Never. Oh my God.
That's so nice of you to say. I really appreciate it. I mean, and the passion that was just, sort of coming out or flowing through, or that was there. I mean, this is even, I feel like, again, these are like two related kind of, like the double helix of DNA of like, they're like talking in comedy is like, the job is to talk, and like sort of the form of it is talking, and the function of it is to express something, whether it's something personal, whether it's just something like, I love this diamond of a joke that I've discovered and created and carved and polished, or whether it's something about social justice. So I feel like everything I was just saying like wasn't necessarily like, and that's why comedy, you know, it was just like, that's why like there are more, like comedy isn't the only important thing. And I am glad, I do think that the passion that informs my desire to be at least a better cog in the wheel of the world is also, you know, it's related to the passion of wanting to be a better cog in the wheel of my own existence, personally, professionally, creatively, spiritually, emotionally, what all of the things. So yeah, I feel like hopefully all the currents, I know they say like a rising tide, you know, lifts all boats, but also some of the boats need more lifting. So like I'm happy to hopefully help other people who are like pointing at those boats that they're like, hey, we lift these boats. I want to come over here and help me with this boat, or this house that's on fire. And they're like, yeah, like if you water all the houses, then that'll help them not be on fire. But why not start with the ones on fire? This is just like a revamping of like a meme that I've seen when people talk about all lives matter compared to Black Lives Matter. It's like Black Lives Matter also, like we're trying to catch them up to the mattering that has already been gifted, that is already present in whiteness. So thank you.
The other day I was in a class and there was mostly men and a few women. I don't know the ratio,
Sure.
but it felt like more men because it always does. And so somebody said some jokes and they were looking for feedback. So I said, how about this way? And this guy said, and another guy confirmed that I had used way too many words with my idea.
Huh.
So then the person that said that went on with his idea that was as many words or longer. And that's all I want to say about men versus women in comedy.
Well, here's what I want to say to that. Number one, on behalf of all men, I say nothing for all men. I'm not the spokesman, but I will say if those guys were watching this, then they would see this man saying way more words than any woman on this than you. And of course, it's not the. I mean, it's valuable to like in comedy, like when you're starting out, the advice of like word economy can be a good lesson to incorporate. Like if you can tell a joke with fewer words and have the same content, why not? But if you can have more words and more fun and more joke and more like, and you get to do whatever you want to do. So certainly, like my girlfriend talks less than I do, and I talk more than she does. And we've both been learning from each other, I'd say, with respect to this. Like there's sometimes when she'll say something and it's like a funny idea or a good thought. And there's sometimes that she doesn't say those things. Sometimes she says them and then they kind of just, if it's just me or if it's a group of people, we'll continue on past it. And then later, sometimes she'll be like, hey, I want to say this thing that I said. I think it's a good idea. I think it's valuable. I think it's funny. I'm like, oh yeah. And she's like, well, in the moment, it just kind of went by because she's like, maybe I didn't like deliver it as confidently. So she's like, I feel she's seen from me and also from like the women in my family, my mother and my grandmother. My mother does and my grandmother did talk as much as I like when called upon or when not called upon. Like if this like phone calls with my mom are sometimes like I talk as much as you're talking now and she talks as much as I'm talking now. And sometimes it's even and sometimes it's like we have an equilibrium that we're comfortable with. But when I'm talking, and here I am on a show that you've invited me to be on. And so I think like on my podcast, if I invite a person on my podcast, I strive to have them talk more than I do, to ask them questions and have them share of themselves. At least maybe sometimes it's even. Maybe if they say something like, ooh, and then it's a conversation as opposed to just an interview. But I also know that when sometimes people ask me a question on my own podcast, they're like, wow, what about this? I'm like, oh, I've talked about this like extensively. Like I don't need to say that again. So that's why I feel like there's so many, like I have so many questions about you that you've probably shared extensive. Maybe you haven't, but maybe I imagine that you share of yourself as much as you do with your audience. And that when you have a guest, I'm like, this is what I do when I have a guest is I encourage the guest to speak. And I'm happy when if I do a podcast where I'm the host and they speak 90% of the time, I'm like, this is so great. Like I didn't burn any of my own stories. I didn't repeat myself over and over. I learned. I'm there to learn in that situation. And so it's funny that my girlfriend is learning from my grandmother, from my mother, from the women in my family. She's like, oh, like she grew up without those role models, and I grew up with them. And so maybe even with that respect, like, my mother and grandmother were women and I wasn't learning like that, like, oh, women do this and men do this. I was like, oh, we talk, Jews talk, our family talks, And so my girlfriend sees this and she learns from me and she talks, oh, at least she's not as much as me, but more and more. Like, she's like, when I have something to say, I say it more than when I did in the past. And I have learned from her the value of silence and space and time and peace and quiet and listening more than I did before. So we're not in the same place, but we're coming from a place and meeting closer to where we were. And so that is that's valuable, but certainly men talk a lot, and those men who told you that you were talking a lot were talking probably more than you, and certainly more than they ought. So but like, they're children. We're all children. Everyone's children. And just men, we haven't learned as much because we haven't listened as much.
That's true. Like if I would have said something like, you just said as many words as you told me were too many, I counted them, then I would be the classic BITCH.
Oh yeah, it's it's such a complex metric system that we have, in our lives to, like, I've talked about this, like the idea that when you're using, silverware, there's a perhaps quote unquote correct by some probably old racist metrics, they're like, oh, this is the right fork to use in this way then. But whatever it is, like, if you don't know what fork to use when you use a fork, like, my understanding is, I think this is like a Miss Manners thing or a Dear Abby thing. That's like, it's ruder to like tell someone that they're using the wrong fork than it is to use the wrong fork. Like if somebody's using the wrong fork, and I think that sometimes people will correct people's grammar online in a way that, like, look, if you just made a mistake, use the wrong use the wrong there, use the one you didn't intend. Like, if the message still is clear, then who cares? And like, I'd much rather be friends with a person who spells a word wrong than who spells their behavior wrong, than who spells their behavior unkindly. Like, I'm like, I try to spell things correctly, but even like, and I did well in school. I know how to spell a lot of words, but sometimes you're going fast and you don't spell one the way that other people spell it. And who can, like, there's important protesting going on, and it's not about like, there's real Nazis, so grammar Nazis, focus on them.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I think so. In with respect to what you were sharing about your, like, if you had said to them, like, you would basically be turning the tables on them. But I've heard this thing that, like, if you turn the tables, you're still at the table. Like, there's no way. All you can do is have your experience, like, speak up when it's valuable to speak up. And maybe there is a situation in which, if I was there in that room, maybe I would have said, I feel like you guys just said a lot more words, and look at this. Now all these men are saying a lot of words, because surely they weren't sitting there with a wordometer, a wordometer.
That's beautiful.
So,
well,
yeah.
Is there any inspiration of getting through a pandemic, or did you already cover that?
That's a great question. I think I covered I think I answered the question of how am I improving if I am during this pandemic. But I guess I will say this. So I've been for the past several months, not traveling like I would normally be doing if there were no pandemic. And so I've been at home for the most part, like some days not even leaving my home, trying to go on walks, I'm actually sitting outside in a garden in back of my home right now that I'm very grateful to have as part of the apartment that I live in. And so for me, it's valuable to have, like, when I wake up, sort of this schedule, ritual, routine where, like, I wake up and I drink one of these, which is like a liter of water, because one day I didn't drink enough water, and it emotionally impacted me. And my girlfriend has this book about how important water is, and we all know how important water is, but knowing how important it is actually not. There's bugs flying around, in case you're wondering why I'm doing dances every once in a while. But knowing to drink a lot of water is not the same as drinking enough water. So I drink 3 of these liters a day, and that is valuable. We've been cooking more, but in the morning I will drink one of these while I read, like, something either from Ram Dass or Pema Chodron or Thich Nhat Hanh, something from a Buddhist or spiritual author, teacher, writer, learner. And so that'll be like maybe between 10 and 20 minutes. I'll read a few pages, a chapter, however long it takes me to drink that. Then I'll sit and I'll meditate for 10 or 20 minutes, sometimes out here in nature, sometimes inside, depending. Then I will do these stream of consciousness or writing. I'll start writing with 750words.com, which is a website I like. It's sort of like a morning pages, the artist's way style, just like, starting the day. Basically, the formative minutes of the day are a thing I read about from a guy named Alan Cohen. He was like, the formative years of your life can be valuable in helping, set you off on the right foot. What you get nutritionally then will help determine maybe you won't be as tall if you don't get all of the nutritional needs, and the same needs, like physically, mentally, emotionally. And so he likens it to the formative minutes of the day. Like, if you start the day plunging into your phone, plunging into the social media stormscape, then you might start the day chaotically. But if you start it with, either meditation or just quiet or just, breathing or walking or sitting or exercising or praying or whatever your version of that is, or reading something peaceful, and then so that's the way I like starting. And I was talking with a buddy who another comedian, who's like, during these times, like, without a schedule, without knowing, like, I go here on this day and I go here at this week and he's like, for me it's been valuable to have a schedule, to make it for myself, be like, I meditate at 9, and then I go on the exercise bike at 10, and then at 1 I do this writing, and a meal is at this time, and then another meditation at this point, and then I call a friend at this time. And if that's valuable for you, like, if you're a person who maybe trends towards chaos, then perhaps a schedule can help you. If you're a person that trends towards too much order, then maybe give yourself permission to break it up. So I've always felt like, as a person who didn't have a regular job for the past 10 years, like where I go to the same building every day, I find it's valuable to have some structure each day. And then the rest of the day, I'm like, all right, it's open. I have an open, an open work, creative life experience. So I every day do something that's the same. And if you have a job where every day you do what's the same, maybe have every day where you do something that's unstructured, something that's open. So wherever, like, if you're breathing in, the good advice is to breathe out. If you're breathing out, the next advice is to breathe in. So wherever you're at, like, if you listen to any of this and you're like, no, then do the other way. If you use what's within you to help you figure out what you need, and being quiet and peaceful, if you have the capacity to do that. If you're holed up alone, or if you have a room you can escape to, or if you can go for a walk, like, just listen to yourself for a few minutes sometime, and then see if yourself will tell you what you want or need, because I can only give you my own advice for me, which works for me. So if you're me, then do what I do, and if you're you, then do what you do. That's my advice.
love you so much. You are so fabulous.
I really appreciate it. You are, as they say, that we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And so by you seeing the fabulousness in me, there must also be that same light of fabulousness within you. Sincerely, this has been such a delight. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and say hello to your lovely lady and all the best to you both.
The
And
same.
may your grandmother rest in peace.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Have a great one, Michael Adam Kaplan.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And
The same.
may your grandmother rest in peace.
Thank you so much.